Good morning, everyone, and welcome. First, I hope everyone is healthy and safe, taking the time that they need to continue to be that way. My name is Andrea Ray, and I have the pleasure to serve as the President CEO at the Seattle Southside Chamber of Commerce. On behalf of our board and our staff, welcome to our sixth SMART Southside Mitigation and Recovery Task Force webinar on an update for the CARES Act. Our webinar series is a strategic initiative dedicated to our mission at the Chamber to connect, convene, and create economic opportunity for South King County. That mission hasn't changed with the pandemic, but our delivery methods certainly have. We're grateful that you can join us here today virtually. Advocacy is a huge part of our work at Seattle Southside, and we have been advocating very hard for all of you, our businesses and community members, for support at all levels of government. The CARES Act passed at the end of March, which meant to provide much needed relief to small businesses. Unfortunately, the need far outpaced the original appropriation, and Congress was able to pass additional funding to help more small businesses gain access to both the SBA's Economic Injury Disaster Loan, the EIDL, and the Paycheck Protection Plan, PPP. Today, we're going to learn more about that newly expanded legislation, what we can expect, and how best to position you and your business to take advantage of the support. I'm going to turn it over to Renata, our Membership and Programs Manager, to give us a little bit of housekeeping before we get started and I introduce our guest speaker. Renata?
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being with us today on our webinar. Some quick things. I think we're all getting pretty familiar with Zoom these days, but just in case you're not, if you are here as an attendee, then you will be muted for the entire duration of the webinar. That is just so that we can keep track of the content and what's going on, and everybody can hear and listen most efficiently and effectively. You will be able to fully see all of the presentation and whoever is speaking in your default view. And so there are no steps or actions needed on your part there. As far as questions in chat, we do have a Q&A feature. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A icon. You're welcome at any time to bring that up and pop in any questions that you have that may come up during the presentation. I will be moderating and monitoring those questions. And at the appropriate time, we'll have plenty of time to address those questions and comments and concerns. And so please feel free to utilize that Q&A feature at any time. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Andrea.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Renata. And so again, we're thrilled that Chris Eyler, the Executive Director for Congressional and Public Affairs at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, is here to give us our update on the CARES Act. Welcome back, Chris. We're thrilled to have you.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you, Renata. Again, my name is Chris Eyler. I'm the U.S. Chamber's Executive Director for the Northwest region. I was on with you all several weeks ago to walk you through all of the major details of the CARES Act. And today I'm just going to update you on where things stand with the key features of the CARES Act, as well as a couple of items that we see coming up in the next phase of the congressional response or the federal government's response to the coronavirus crisis. So could you take me to the first slide, please, Renata? Just as a quick reminder of what the major pieces of the CARES Act for the business community are. The first and most significant piece is the Paycheck Protection Program. This was a $349 billion loan program set up to help small businesses continue to pay their employees during the duration of the crisis. The loans are based on your average payroll, and the loans will convert to a grant which businesses do not have to pay back if 75% of the loan is used to pay employees, and any remaining amount is used on rent, interest on mortgages, and utilities for the 8-week period following origination of the loan. Again, this is the federal government's key program to help businesses continue to pay their employees during the duration of the crisis. The other major program for small businesses is the SBA's Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. While this is an option for small businesses, again, the emphasis from the federal government is on the Paycheck Protection Program. That being said, this program is open to small businesses. Under the original program, it would provide up to a $2 million loan, as well as up to a $10,000 emergency grant that does not have to be repaid. However, due to the enormity of the demand being placed on the program, SBA has really had to scale back the scope of both the emergency grant and the amount of the loans that they can give. Based on demand, they're basing the emergency grant on the number of employees that businesses have, and awarding the emergency grant $1,000 per employee. So for instance, if you only have 5 employees, the most you can expect in the emergency grant is $5,000. Additionally, they have capped the amount of the loan they can give per business at $15,000. So the most aid that currently SBA is able to award through the EIDL program is $25,000. So that'd be $10,000 in the emergency grant, and then up to a $15,000 loan. But again, part of the reason here is that Congress is clearly prioritizing the Paycheck Protection Program to help small businesses continue to pay their employees during the crisis. If either of these programs are not available, there are some other options available to small businesses. The employer retention tax credit, that the slide should actually say $5,000 per employee tax credit. This is a refundable tax credit to assist businesses who continue to pay their employees during the crisis. The other major program is the Main Street Lending Program. This program has actually not fully come online yet. Department of Treasury and the Federal Reserve are in the final stages of putting the final touches on the program. But this is a very straightforward loan program. The loans are backed up by the federal government, and it is being used to target more medium-sized businesses. The minimum size of a loan, based on guidance issued by the Federal Reserve just this week, the minimum loan is $500,000. So if you are looking or considering a Paycheck Protection Program loan, that is, and you're looking to get, in the neighborhood of a $500,000 loan, you might also want to talk to your lender about potentially getting a loan through the Main Street Lending Program. These are loans; they do not convert to grants, but the terms are, they will be loaned out at favorable interest rates. But there are going to be some conditions placed on these loans with respect to executive compensation and stock buybacks during the duration of the loan. But again, if you are a small business, your first stop should be looking at the Paycheck Protection Program and the SBA EIDL program before you go to any of the other programs. The PPP and the EIDL have much more favorable terms than the other two programs. Next slide, please. So what happened? In short, the federal government did 14 years worth of lending in 14 days. By the time that the Paycheck Protection Program, the initial appropriation for the Paycheck Protection Program ran out, 1.667 million loans had been approved by 4,975 lenders. 75% of those loans were for less than $150,000, and the average loan amount was $206,000. Likewise, as I already alluded to, likewise with the SBA EIDL program, the number of applicants vastly exceeded the resources, and SBA was forced to place a number of limits, and they were unable to provide the type of assistance that the program would normally be able to provide during your typical natural disasters, which this program was set up to respond to. Because of the volume, as I said, the $10,000 grant was switched to up to $10,000, and the SBA was awarding the grant based on the number of employees at $1,000 per employee, and loans were being limited to no more than $15,000 per applicant. So next slide, please. So last week, after 2.5 weeks of negotiations, Congress was able to come to an agreement to replenish both the Paycheck Protection Program and the SBA EIDL program in a bill which they referred to as the Paycheck Protection Program and Healthcare Enhancement Act. Under this bill, they replenished the PPP with $310 billion, bringing the total appropriation for the PPP to $659 billion. Recognizing that the initial program, the money went out the door very quickly. They carved out $60 billion of the $310 billion and set that aside for smaller lenders. The hope here is that this will spread the money around a little more and will reduce a little bit of the feeding frenzy we saw in the first phase of this. Additionally, they have capped the total amount that any one lender can disperse at 10%. So again, the goal here was to lessen that feeding frenzy and spread the money around to more banks and hopefully get this money spread around to more small businesses and avoid some of these situations where we've seen larger businesses that may not necessarily need the money, getting the money and then being forced to return it after it comes out that they've gotten. One thing I do want to highlight about the bill that passed last week was it was pretty much strictly a funding bill. So there were no policy changes made to the Paycheck Protection Program. And this included that they did not yet open the Paycheck Protection Program to 501c6 and other nonprofit organizations. Right now, under the law, the Paycheck Protection Program is still limited to only the only type of nonprofit that the Paycheck Protection Program is open to is 501c3 nonprofits, as well as 501c19 veterans organizations. We are continuing to work to talk to Congress about opening this program up more to more nonprofits, including 501c6, which would include local chambers of commerce. Next slide, please. With respect to the Small Business Administration's EIDL program, the bill did provide additional funding for this program, though not as much as the PPP. Again, the PPP is the government's priority program for small businesses, but they did provide an additional $60 billion for the EIDL. Of the $60 billion, $10 billion of that is an increase for the emergency grant program, and then $50 billion is set aside for the EIDL loan. It is a kind of difficult for us to determine how long this money will last for the EIDL. The SBA is not being very transparent. I was just on a webinar this morning, and one of the participants said that the SBA is still not accepting new applications. Based on what we've been told by the SBA is that they are vigorously trying to work through the backlog of applications they got during the first phase and get those loans processed and out the door. We're not very clear on when they will be accepting new applications. Hopefully that will be soon. But as I said, SBA is a little less transparent than the banks are being with us. So it's hard for us to say how long this money will last. Going back to the PPP for a minute, we do expect that money to run out as well, and probably in the very near term. But some of the changes that the government has put on lenders to spread that money around to limit the amount that individual banks can disperse, that has helped, as I said, slow the feeding frenzy and give businesses a little more time to find a lender that they can work with. But again, we do expect that money to run out eventually, as we do expect the money in the EIDL program to run out again. In addition to both the EIDL and the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program and Healthcare Enhancement Act, as the name implies, also provided additional funding for hospitals and healthcare providers. It upped the appropriation in the original CARES Act from $100 billion to $175 billion. It also provided an additional $25 billion for testing. Next slide, please. So uh, this is a lot of information, and there are a lot of very different programs out there, and I'm sure there are a lot of questions about how do I access these programs. So the U.S. Chamber has been developing a series of guide documents to help small businesses uh, access these programs and find out what they need to do to access them. We have a guide document specifically for the Paycheck Protection Program. We have a separate document that walks independent contractors through what they need to do to access both the Paycheck Protection Program and the EIDL program, in addition to explaining what an independent contractor's options are with respect to the expanded unemployment benefits provided under both the Phase 2 and the Phase 3 bill. We have a document that fully explains what you need to do to access the EIDL, as well as one that explains the employee retention tax credit. And we have also a couple of documents related to the paid leave programs that were enacted under the Phase 2 bill. And then we recognize that a lot of employees are faced with a situation where they may be furloughed or laid off, and they're losing access to their healthcare benefits. So we have developed a document that walks through a number of options that individuals might want to look at in order to continue their healthcare coverage, be it getting on a spouse's healthcare coverage, electing to obtain COBRA coverage, or go on one of the healthcare exchanges. All of these documents can be downloaded on our website, uschamber.com/coronavirus. We are continuing to update each of these documents as more guidance comes down from the federal government. And in addition to that, we are continuing to develop additional documents as we encounter more, as we get more feedback from our members about the challenges they are facing in accessing these programs, as well as a number of the programs that are currently in development, such as the Main Street Lending Program. Next slide, please. So in addition to all of the aid programs that we are working on making sure the federal government funds fully and making sure that they work as best as they can for the businesses that they're intended for, we are also beginning to turn our attention to what comes next. Specifically what it means to return to work and reopen the economy. We recognize, and a lot of our members fully recognize, that it will not be as simple as flipping a switch and everyone just showing back up to work on Monday or whenever the business may reopen. There are going to be a lot of changes in our new normal, and there are a lot of concerns that are being raised both by businesses as well as by a number of employees. We kind of lump all of what we are looking at into three baskets: essential services, legal liability issues, and support for businesses and individuals. On the essential services side, basically what we're talking about here is what does a business have to do now in light of the pandemic? What does a business have to do to reopen and start serving the public again? Things like what types of health screenings are businesses going to be expected to do as employees come back to work? Are they, what types of things are they going to have to do as far as testing employees for COVID-19? What types of things are businesses going to have to do as far as providing protective equipment, things like face masks and other PPE to their employees and to customers who patronize their businesses? Public transportation is going to be a big concern. While a number of employees are able to get to work in their own vehicle, so many employees rely on public transportation. And in an environment where we're requiring a certain degree of social distancing, what does that mean for public transportation? And then, of course, what are employees going to be able to do as far as childcare goes, so that they can have some place to take their children while they come to work? All of these things are issues that we are looking at in more detail. One of the things that we are most recently spoke up on is that we're recognizing that a lot of cities, states, and counties are issuing their own guidance with respect to all of these issues. While we fully respect that they're well-intended and they're trying to do the right thing, there's a patchwork of different guidance that's being put out there. And while For instance, with social distancing and restaurants, some of the guidance is saying that tables have to be 7 feet apart. Where in another community, it says they have to be 10 feet apart. So it's creating a patchwork that's going to be very difficult for a lot of businesses to comply with, particularly if they have multiple locations across multiple communities. And so we are urging policymakers at the state, local, and federal level to consider working more collaboratively to develop a more uniform set of standards to help businesses as they re-enter the economy in this new normal. Additionally, as they put out this guidance, we are also urging them to not simply turn the guidance into regulation. For the time being, we want to see this remain guidance. We don't want this to become immediately legally enforceable. Given how quickly this crisis has unfolded, and how quickly businesses are going to have to figure out how to comply with all of this. On legal liability issues, again, this is something that we are already starting to see lawsuits being filed against businesses. We basically put all of these legal liability issues into 4 categories: exposure liability, products liability, healthcare, and securities litigation. For most small businesses, the biggest concern is going to be exposure liability. In other words, we want to make sure businesses are protected from unfair and opportunistic personal injury claims that an individual was exposed to coronavirus at a particular business. We are still working through the details on this, as well as some of these other legal issues I'm going to address as far as proposals, but we see all of what we're talking about as far as legal liability reforms as temporary, not permanent legal liability reforms, but recognizing that this crisis has come about very quickly. We want to protect businesses that have made good faith efforts to comply with best practices and the guidance that governments are putting out to respond to the crisis. So we don't want to see anyone unfairly targeted for legal liability when they've made a good faith effort to comply with guidance. And again, exposure liability, this is going to be probably the biggest concern of small businesses, particularly those that serve the public, like restaurants, theaters, bars, and retail establishments. Likewise, with products liability, here we have seen a very precarious shortage of personal protective equipment throughout this crisis. And a lot of businesses have stepped up. They've retooled their production lines to help fill that void and produce face masks, hand sanitizer, and whatnot. Again, we do not want to see these businesses unfairly targeted by products liability attorneys. If those businesses have been acting in good faith and really done their bit to step up and help in this crisis. So we're looking at proposals to give to both federal and state policymakers about providing some temporary products liability protections for these companies. Likewise, with healthcare providers, again, this is going to be targeted more at providing protections to a lot of our hospital members, as well as our other healthcare providers, providing some legal protections for those individuals who've had to respond to a very unique and fast-moving crisis. And then lastly, securities litigation. This is not going to be something that you see as being much of a big concern for small businesses, but a lot of larger corporations are facing the possibility of being sued because their stock price dropped significantly during the crisis. Again, we want to see that these businesses are protected and not subjected to unfair and opportunistic lawsuits. And then lastly, support for businesses and individuals. This is really, our concern here is really having to do with businesses that are, to be successful, they are dependent on high density gatherings. So restaurants, restaurants, theaters, any sports venues, anything that, whose business is successful based on having a lot of people come in and patronize their business. We want to make sure that steps are taken to help protect these businesses, as well as the travel industry, which is likely going to see a pretty significant decrease in business, at least in the short term. And then also, what do we do for individuals who are delayed in returning to work? While businesses reopen, there's going to be a number of individuals who simply will not be permitted to come back because they are quarantined or they've been exposed to coronavirus, or they are an at-risk population. So we want to be looking at how we help these individuals. Beyond that, as far as what you can expect out of Congress moving forward, we do expect that there will be some form of a Phase 4 bill. However, timing on that remains to be seen. With respect to the Phase 3.5, the funding bill we just saw passed last week, that took 2.5 weeks for Congress to work its way through Congress, and it did not get through Congress without a fight. So with each successive bill that Congress takes up to deal with this situation, we expect that it'll be that much harder with each bill. So with the Phase 4 bill, this is going to be something that is taken up and considered over the next month or so. The Senate comes back into session next week. The House is not yet scheduled to return, at least not next week. Right now, it's not entirely clear when the House will come back, but it's going to require Congress to be back in DC for them to do anything further at this point. Senator McConnell has indicated that he no longer wants to do any legislation by unanimous consent. So he will not allow anything to move through the Senate without an actual physical vote. So as far as timing goes, I wouldn't expect to see anything till at least Memorial Day. And as far as what is in that bill, it's likely going to be replenishing funding for things like the PPP, the EIDL. It will be taking up a number of technical corrections to these programs. This would be an opportunity to expand eligibility for the PPP to organizations like 501c6s. As well as address a number of the concerns I've raised about reopening the economy, legal liability issues, and the types of requirements that could be placed on businesses as far as things like testing, PPE, supplying PPE to employees and whatnot. So there is still a lot of uncertainty. Again, we do expect to see a Phase 4 bill, but beyond that, it's right now it's very unclear if there will be a Phase 5, 6, 7 bill. But this is clearly going to be at the top of the agenda for the foreseeable future, at least at the federal level. And so with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
It's great. So just a reminder that you do have the Q&A box there. You can type your question in. And we do have a question from our attendees. And that question is related to childcare. So I know, Chris, you mentioned the U.S. Chamber advocating for, support for some of these, return to work services. Childcare centers, many are still open that are providing access, to employees that are able to return to work and essential workers. And so for that particular question, please reach out to us at the Chamber. We have Chamber member childcare facilities that are open and receiving children at this time. And we would be happy to, connect you with those resources. You can also even go to our website and go to the directory feature on the website and search for childcare, and they will pop up there as well. Some of them may not be open, and so we're happy to provide that direct reference as well. It's a big part of what we do at the Chamber of Commerce is do those referrals. So thank you so much for that question. My question for you, Chris, while we're waiting for maybe someone else to, ask another question, is related to that reopening guidance. And so I know our chamber has reached out, to our state and county, local officials with, what will the guidance be? Can we help provide a checklist? Both for the business to know, what they need to do to prepare to reopen, but then also what's that system, for helping to increase consumer confidence, right? So when you go to a restaurant, there's the rating on the wall from the, Department of Health. And so we've been asking, for that and trying to come up with, again, another service, that we could provide, at the Chamber for our member businesses and our, local customers to know that they can feel safe patroning, our local businesses. But then again, also understanding on the flip side of, that's going to get really complicated really quickly if every chamber and every city and every trade association kind of publishes their own, seal of approval or, certificates, right? So could you talk a little bit more just about, what we can do in that space to provide that guidance that helps, that support, and also encourage that consumer confidence?
Well, and I think you've hit on one of the major problems that we've identified is that there's just an entire patchwork of guidance coming down, and that is in part why we are urging states to not immediately convert this guidance to regulation that's enforceable by law, because businesses are so confused about what they need to do right now. And it's also why we, just this week, we've sent a letter to every governor and every mayor, or mayors of major cities, and as well as the federal government, the president, urging them to work more collaboratively to develop a uniform set of guidance, because there, like you said, there are so many questions out there about what do I do when I reopen, what is going to be expected of me as a business, what types of things am I going to have to provide my customers, and what type of legal liability am I exposing myself to if I don't do these things. So, my short answer to you is like, I don't know, and part of that's because we are just as much in the dark on this as you are. But we are trying to relay that message to policymakers that you need to be sensitive to all of the uncertainty businesses have. Everyone wants to get back to something that's similar to what their life was like before this, but they also want to be safe and they want to do it right. No one wants their customers or their employees to be put in danger. So we want to help businesses do what's right. And part of that is getting everyone on the same page and getting everyone to work collaboratively here.
Absolutely. So I know that's a huge part of our focus here at our chamber, being a regional chamber, working, very closely with different cities, increasing that collaborative culture. And it, again, it's tough. It's tough when times are good, and it's even more difficult now. But that just means that we have to work even harder to make sure that we can get it done. We have another question in the Q&A box. And that is from someone asking about how do they apply, for the loan, should they contact, a lender directly? So I'll let you take that first, Chris, and then I can maybe provide a little follow-up too.
Yes, for the Paycheck Protection Program loans, you go to your bank. If you have a relationship with a bank already, go to that bank. If you don't, pretty much every bank that you know of around here is a qualified lender for the PPP. For the SBA Economic Injury Disaster Loan, this is actually a direct loan program from the SBA, and you'd go to the SBA.gov website to apply for the loan. But again, right now there's more money in the Paycheck Protection Program loan program, and it is the program that was set up to prioritize small businesses for this particular crisis. And the same thing when the Main Street lending program fully comes online. And again, this program is set up more for mid-sized employers. But again, that is a loan program that you would go to your bank for. So you would inquire about a Main Street lending program loan through your bank as well.
Perfect. Great. Thank you so much. I know we've been getting reports at our chamber that, it's difficult for people to get a hold of their bank, and their lender. There are other options, out there to not go through your bank directly. And we work very closely also with the Small Business Development Center, our local SBDC shop. So if you are having problems contacting your banker or having your banker return your calls, please do, reach out to us, or we can, again, connect you to our local SBDC chapter and, look at what other options are. But yes, absolutely. First step, contact your bank directly. And then we have a request from one of our attendees, and it is difficult for him to type something into the Q&A box. And so, Quentin, I'm going to go ahead and call on you and let you ask your question live.
Thank you, Andrea. Good morning, Chris.
Good morning.
I work with Andrea a lot with the city of Berrien, and I do a lot of Berrien City council stuff. But I just had a question yesterday morning. It was brought to my attention because I told them that I had to go to this webinar meeting on Friday morning, and I said I would bring it up. I have two friends that are out of work because of the COVID-19 virus, and they have two kids, and they're having trouble finding daycare because they are technically essential worker. And I told them that I asked them who they bank with, and they told me that they bank with Wells Fargo. They use Boeing Credit Union for some of the savings stuff. I said, you need to check with those banks and see if they are doing a loan thing, because they're not even back to work yet, and the managers are having a fit because they're not able to pay their rent. Well, the managers cannot kick them out because they're not getting their rent on time, and so we lie down to the fact that there is some rent problems, and they want to kick them out, and technically by the our governor general, you can't put those people out on the street. So, you know, these landlords are really having a tough time understanding what the attorney general is trying to do and the banks are trying to do, and the managers are just trying to throw them out of their living situation, and I don't think that's very fair for them.
Thank you, Quentin. I'll go ahead and take a stab at this first, Chris, and then maybe you can too, because there's a lot to unpack there. But again, I think that these are very common things that we're hearing from our community members. We have a very diverse economic ecosystem, right? And what we're seeing and what this crisis has really called attention to is just how fragilely, and interconnected all of these systems are, right? So when someone loses their job and they're on unemployment, that creates challenges, for them to be able to pay their bills. That creates other challenges then, for the landlord to be able to continue to pay, their mortgage. And everything just kind of, filters down, right? One problem creates another problem, everything is incredibly, interconnected, which is why, again, we've been advocating so much on, what are those, again, collaborative, comprehensive, relief systems and structures that we can put into place. Putting the moratorium on the evictions, is part of, what could be a really great, relief package. But if there's no relief on taxes and mortgages, where does that stop, right? So how, this is a big question, how can we, encourage, more of that collaboration, interagency collaboration, between systems that have so traditionally been siloed, quite frankly, right? Public health is siloed, Department of Commerce, right? How can we take this crisis and create an opportunity to recognize and support all aspects of our economic ecosystem.
And I would just echo everything that Andrea just said. Like she said, there are so many things that are coming up as a result of this. And I think a lot of the frustration has to do, or a lot of this has to do with the fact that this crisis unfolded very quickly, and the response unfolded very, very quickly. And there was this rush to get money out into the hands of small businesses as quickly as possible. And because of that, at least at the federal level, the legislation left a lot of flexibility for the agencies to administer this program. And it also left a lot of ambiguities and vagueness in the law. And there are things that are falling through the cracks, and these are the types of things that we'll have the opportunity to address in a Phase 4 bill. With respect to the situation being faced by property managers and landlords, this is something that's been largely dealt with at the state level, and we haven't gotten involved at the federal level. We haven't gotten involved in it that much. You also brought up the issue of lenders and the PPP program. Again, they took some steps in this 3.5 funding bill to kind of even out the number of where the money was going as far as to which lenders were getting it and lending it out. So yes, banks like Wells Fargo, they are dealing with a very high volume of loans, and a lot of the money is going out very quickly from them. That is why they've capped the amount at no more than 10% of the total amount can go out from any one lender. And they carved out specifically $60 billion of that $310 billion to go to smaller lenders like BECU and other credit unions. So if you've gone to a larger lender and you're having trouble getting a loan through them, or even getting in the door to get an application submitted, look at some of these other smaller lenders out there, because they have taken steps to make sure that more of the money is being directed towards these smaller lenders that deal more with smaller and minority-owned businesses. And then I think you also mentioned childcare, and I think that was brought up earlier. And I think Renata can help you identify some childcare providers in the area.
Absolutely, yes. We're happy to do that. Again, any referral, for any business, we probably, do at least, 5 or 6 referrals, a day for people that are looking, for different types of businesses. And so that's a service we're always very happy to provide. So thank you so much. If there are no other questions, in that chat box, I'll maybe give people a second if anyone else has wants to raise their hand or ask a question. So kind of going once, going twice. I'll just then ask Chris if you have any final thoughts, again, as we do move forward together. Again, thinking about there's a federal election season that's coming up too, which adds some complexity to how we work collaboratively together, and maybe just leave us with some final thoughts on what we can expect next.
I think we fully recognize all of the frustration that you all are dealing with right now, particularly small businesses, and that's why over the past month, I have been doing these types of presentations nonstop to make sure that you all are aware of what's available out there at the federal level, as well as to make sure that we are hearing from you about how these programs are working, and what we can take back to DC as they make further tweaks to these programs. So, it's our commitment to you, and in particular, our state and local chamber partners like the Seattle Southside Chamber, to make sure that we're getting you the information you need. The local chambers really are some of our most important partners, and this has been a really significant opportunity for us to really work more collaboratively and closely with you all. And so, my commitment to Andrea and Renata, as well as your members, is to continue providing as much information as I can to help you guys get through this crisis. That's what we're here for, and we want to make sure that you continue to serve your members as best as you can.
Perfect. So again, really appreciate your support, Chris. Really appreciate the support of the U.S. Chamber and the collaboration that we have. Again, we are so happy to be able to provide the informational support that we can to our community and our members as a nonprofit organization that is here to help you. We could also use some help, right? So as Chris mentioned, a lot of these funding programs are not eligible. Our organization is not eligible to receive those. So we rely on sponsorship for things like this webinar series and our virtual programs. Sponsorship of our task force, the Southside Mitigation and Recovery Task Force, donations, and investments. And so if you are able to help, we would really appreciate it. If you find value in this information and the support that we provide, again, anything helps. So again, really appreciate the opportunity to provide that service to you. There's our contact information right there. Thank you so much, Renata, for putting that on the screen. So every Friday we do a webinar. And so next Friday, May 8th, Chris mentioned that one of the industries that's been hit the hardest is the hospitality and tourism industry. And so we'll hear from our hospitality and tourism partner, the Regional Tourism Authority. They'll give us an overview on, what they're expecting for the industry and how we can support them and that work. We have around 5,000, local jobs that are directly connected to the hospitality and tourism industry in the Seattle Southside region. So that's May 8th. Again, part of our series and our work with our task force is also marketing and promotion. We have several active marketing campaigns right now. Keep Calm and Carry Out to help support our restaurant partners. We'll be launching a new program helping to support small businesses next week, our Saving Local campaign. So please be on the lookout for that. Follow us on Facebook, reach out to us, let us know how we can help you. And thank you for considering helping us as well. So Chris, everyone, thank you. Everyone have a great weekend. Appreciate you making the time this morning. Take care.
Thank you.